Dr. Jackson Quill never expected to spend his career trying to prove that human stupidity was a weapon. Yet here he was, knee-deep in sentient botanical guts on the planet Veridara, contemplating just that. The lab, if you could call it that without snickering, was an underground bunker, camouflaged by the native flora that occasionally attempted to eat them. Research base sounded far more glamorous than huddled in a hole praying not to become fertilizer. Quill, can you explain why we're bothering with this insanity? Asked Zara. No, not that Zara. This one was a wiry engineer with a talent for sarcasm and a deep-seated hatred for mornings. She propped her boots on a console, chewing on a nutrition bar like it owed her money. Because we're paid too well to ask questions, and the alternative involves being shot as traitors, Jackson replied, deadpan, while fiddling with a gadget that looked suspiciously like a toaster with ambitions. Besides, weaponizing human unpredictability is just smart. Who better to harness chaos than a species that invented reality TV? Zara snorted, sending crumbs across the console. I bet the planet's watching us like a soap opera. As the stomach churns, starring us as appetizers, their task was as clear as mud. Explore the potential of human unpredictability, stupidity if you were feeling less charitable, as a weapon. In a universe filled with hyperlogical machines and hyperpredictable aliens, humans stood out as the fly in the ointment, or the wrench in the machine, depending on the day's mood. The bunker shook slightly, an almost imperceptible tremor if you weren't used to the planet's occasional grumblings. Veridara, in its infinite wisdom, had started showing signs of life, sentience, if you believed the rumors. And who wouldn't believe rumors when they involved a planet that seemed to enjoy messing with its inhabitants? Jackson liked to think Veridara had a sense of humor, albeit one that leaned heavily on slapstick. I swear this place is haunted, muttered Zara, wiping the crumbs into the console's crevices for the next poor soul to find. Or alive, or both. I think it likes us, Jackson said, cradling a cup of what passed for coffee. We're like its weird, adopted pets. The doors hissed open, letting in a gust of damp air, and a grizzled figure clad in a jacket that had seen too many bad days. This was Captain Rafe, the man in charge of ensuring that whatever they did didn't explode too loudly. Any progress today, or are we still pretending this is a think tank instead of a circus tent? Progress is a matter of perspective, Jackson replied, gesturing to his toaster. Right now, we're attempting to teach this little guy to make toast that doesn't explode. Rafe grunted, a noise that could mean anything from good job to why am I here, often leaning towards the latter. Remember, the bigwigs upstairs expect results, and by results I mean things that won't get us all court-martialed. Noted, Zara said, voice laced with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for tax audits. The scientists and engineers milled about, a motley crew of humanity's finest, or at least, humanity's most expendable. They tinkered, tested, and occasionally swore at their equipment, as if it were responsible for all of life's injustices. Jackson liked to think of his team as the ragtag bunch you're stuck with in the apocalypse, not the heroes you wanted, but the ones you'd be stuck with anyway. Hey, does anyone else hear that? Piped up Milo, a junior scientist whose main job seemed to be finding things that weren't broken yet and fixing that problem. Jackson paused, ear cocked as the faintest whisper of sound tickled the edges of his consciousness. It was like listening to elevator music played on an alien kazoo, just slightly out of tune with reality. Never a good sign when things start making noise on this rock. Could be the planet, Zara suggested, though her eyes told a tale of wishing she hadn't suggested anything at all. Or it's the sound of our funding being quietly cut, Jackson added. The crew fell silent, each staring at their tasks with the kind of focus usually reserved for avoiding eye contact in a crowded elevator. Whatever was happening outside in the verdant chaos of Veridara was beyond their control. Their job was simple: do whatever it took to make the planet, or whoever was in charge, think they were doing something useful. The planet's atmosphere had a way of creeping into the bones, a humidity that clung to skin like regret. Outside the bunker, the landscape was a twisted parody of a jungle, where every leaf seemed to hide a secret, and every shadow promised doom, or at least a very unpleasant rash. Jackson's thoughts wandered to the latest reports of the planet's strange behavior, as if Veridara was a slumbering beast slowly waking up to find humans had set up shop on its back. It was a comforting thought, assuming you found comfort in existential dread. If this place goes sentient, do we still get hazard pay? Zara asked, breaking the silence. I think it's more a lump sum, Jackson replied, tapping his fingers on the console in an offbeat rhythm. I'd like to keep my lumps the way they are, thanks. As if on cue, the ground shivered again, a subtle movement that suggested Veridara was stretching, or perhaps rolling over to get more comfortable. Jackson sighed, because that's what you did when the planet you were trying to weaponize decided to weaponize you right back. Rafe returned, looking as jovial as a man about to be audited by an overzealous tax collector. Command's getting twitchy. They want updates, something to show the brass that our little project isn't just a monumental waste of time and resources. Sure, I'll just call the planet's manager and file a complaint, Jackson said, smirking. Get it done, Quill. Rafe's tone brooked no nonsense, though in Jackson's experience, nonsense was often all that was available. We're working on it, he promised, glancing at Zara, who shrugged, as if to say, your funeral. It was then that the lights flickered, casting the room in a strobe-lit waltz of shadows. The air tasted sharper, a hint of ozone mingling with the stale scent of recycled despair. Well, that's not ominous, Milo observed, peering nervously at the ceiling as if it might fall in on them at any moment. Just once I'd like a day where the planet doesn't try to kill us, Zara muttered. You'd get bored, Jackson replied, though he secretly agreed. In a place like this, boredom was just an invitation for things to go terribly, unpredictably wrong. The console beeped, a cheerful little sound that belied the gravity of the message it delivered. Incoming alert, Zara read, scanning the data. Looks like something's messing with our sensors. Something or someone, Rafe asked, as though the distinction mattered. Jackson frowned at the readout, a tangle of gibberish that might as well have been written in ancient Martian for all the sense it made. Could be the planet. Could be a bad day at the office. The room fell silent again, each person lost in the quiet panic that accompanied the realization that they were dancing on the edge of a knife, and the knife was held by a particularly capricious planet. Whatever it is, we need to figure it out fast, Rafe said, his voice a razor slicing through the hush. Before Command decides, we're all expendable. As if the universe had a wicked sense of timing, the ground beneath their feet trembled once more, a gentle but insistent reminder that Veridara had its own agenda. Jackson's stomach twisted in response, not from fear, but from the nagging suspicion that their time was running out. Looks like we're in for a long night, Zara said, her voice a resigned sigh. Good thing I stocked up on misery, Jackson replied, pulling up a stool and settling in for whatever fresh hell awaited them. The team knew better than to expect clarity from chaos. They were scientists, engineers, dreamers, and fools, all trying to survive on a world that seemed intent on proving them wrong at every turn. In the end, Jackson figured, they'd either find a way to turn human unpredictability into a weapon or become a cautionary tale about hubris and the futility of man against nature. Either way, it promised to be an interesting ride, assuming they lived to tell the tale. The planet grumbled once more, as if sharing a private joke, and Jackson couldn't help but laugh along with it, because sometimes all you could do was laugh and hope it was enough. The lights flickered again, and Zara muttered a low curse under her breath. I swear if I have to fix one more thing in this damn bunker. Jackson, perched precariously on a stool that looked like it had survived a bar fight, scratched his chin thoughtfully. You know, the planet might just be trying to tell us something. Like, get the hell off my lawn. Rafe, arms crossed and patience thinner than a hairline crack in a shuttle window, grunted. Or it's just screwing with us for shits and giggles. Lyra Kessler, the team's resident botanist who somehow managed to look both bored and concerned simultaneously, entered the room clutching a handful of leaves. You all might want to take a look at this. Unless those are coupons for coffee, I'm not interested, Zara replied, leaning back in her chair as if comfort was a battle she intended to win, 1 inch at a time. Lyra ignored her, spreading the leaves out on the table. Each one had a peculiar pattern of veins that seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie light. Not exactly the kind of thing you'd expect from foliage, even on Veridara. These aren't just pretty leaves. I think they're some sort of communication device. Rafe's eyebrows climbed his forehead in what might have been either skepticism or disbelief. Hard to tell with him. Communication. With what exactly? The planet, Lyra replied, as if she was discussing the weather and not the mind-bending possibility that the ground beneath their feet was alive and chatty. Jackson leaned in, inspecting the leaves. They looked innocent enough, but then again, so did politicians before they got elected. So what? The planet's trying to make a call. Does it charge by the minute? Zara shrugged, eyeing the leaves with the kind of suspicion usually reserved for unsolicited advice. As long as it doesn't ask us to put anything on speakerphone. Lyra sighed, a sound like a deflating balloon. I'm serious. These patterns, they're like a code, a message, maybe even a warning. Rafe rubbed the back of his neck, the universal sign of a leader who'd rather be anywhere else. And what exactly is it warning us about? That the drinks at the cantina will kill us faster than Veridara? Possibly, Lyra said, chewing on her lip. Or maybe it's not happy with us tinkering around with its insides. Zara tossed a screw back in a toolbox, the clattering sound punctuating her words. Well, that's just great. We came here to weaponize unpredictability, and now unpredictability is weaponizing us. Jackson chuckled, though there wasn't much humor in it. Figures. We're trying to harness chaos, and chaos decided to harness us right back. Could we take this seriously for a moment? Lyra interjected, looking around the room. If the planet is sentient and possibly hostile, shouldn't we be doing something about it? Like, I don't know, not pissing it off. Rafe sighed, the kind of heavy exhale that suggested he'd seen way too much of the idiocy of mankind. We're here on orders. We do what we're told until someone with more stripes says otherwise. Besides, what are we supposed to do? Apologize, Zara snorted, folding her arms. Hey Veridara, sorry about the intrusion. Here's a fruit basket. Yeah, I'm sure that'll work wonders. Maybe it just wants a bit of peace and quiet, Jackson mused, running a hand through his hair. Or maybe it's like us, just trying to survive one day at a time without getting blown up. Lyra shook her head, frustration etched across her features. This isn't a joke. We need to consider the ethical implications here. If the planet is alive, if it's aware of us, we could be doing more harm than we realize. Rafe scratched at his beard, a gesture that seemed to be his way of signaling deep thought or an impending nap. We're here to do a job. Ethics don't pay the bills. Funny, Zara said dryly. I thought we were here because no one else wanted the gig. The ground shivered again, a gentle but insistent reminder that Veridara was listening, waiting, watching. Jackson couldn't help but feel a chill run up his spine. All I'm saying is, if the planet is trying to tell us something, maybe we should listen, before it decides to get more direct. The room fell into a contemplative silence, the kind that usually precedes bad decisions or very bad news. Outside, the world continued to hum with life, a reminder that they were merely guests overstaying their welcome. Okay, let's say we buy into this, Rafe said, gesturing to the leaves like they were evidence at a trial. What's our next move? Besides praying that command doesn't decide to turn us into a cautionary tale, maybe we stop poking it with sticks, Zara suggested, or at least poke it less aggressively. Jackson stood, pacing the room like a caged animal with a particularly itchy trigger finger. Maybe we could try communicating back. Send a message of our own, see if it responds. Talk to a planet. Rafe's eyebrows were doing acrobatics again. And how do you propose we do that? Light a bonfire and do an interpretive dance. Lyra was already reaching for a console, fingers flying over keys like a concert pianist on a caffeine high. We could use the same technology we're experimenting with. If these leaves are a code, then maybe we can crack it. Or we could just leave, Zara said, ever the voice of practicality. Pack up our toaster and get the hell out ta Dodge. Not an option, Rafe replied, his tone making it clear that the discussion was over. We're here for the long haul, whether we like it or not. The planet seemed to chuckle, the lights flickering once more as if to say, good luck with that. Jackson felt the weight of the situation settle on his shoulders like a particularly angry monkey. They were walking a fine line between discovery and disaster, and the balance was fragile at best. So we dig in, crack the code, and hope we don't accidentally start a war with a planet, Jackson concluded, his voice carrying a note of grim determination. Just another day at the office, Zara said with a wry smile. Where's my hard hat? The team dispersed, each to their own tasks, the tension in the room palpable as they worked against the clock, or maybe against the planet's patience. They were explorers, scientists, and engineers, but most of all they were human, grappling with the unknown in a universe that seemed to grow more complicated by the day. Jackson found himself back at the console, examining the data with a mixture of fascination and trepidation. The planet's whispers were growing louder, its intentions an enigma wrapped in a riddle, layered with existential dread. Whatever it was planning or not planning, they'd have to deal with it, whether they were ready or not. Hey Jackson, Zara called over, breaking him from his reverie. You ever think we might be the bad guys in this story? He considered it, then shrugged. More like the clowns, but yes, sometimes. Guess that's life, Zara said, tucking a stray hair behind her ear. Always someone else's punchline, and with that they delved back into their work, a motley crew facing the unknown with nothing but their wits, a few gadgets, and a stubborn refusal to go quietly into the night. They'd figure it out. If not today, then maybe tomorrow, or maybe the day after that, assuming Veridara didn't have other plans. As the night wore on, the planet continued its subtle dance, a partner in a cosmic waltz that demanded precision and grace, qualities that humans, in their infinite unpredictability, didn't always possess, but they'd make it work somehow. They always did. The planet Veridara seemed to have had enough of the team's antics, as if it were hosting a poorly planned party, and was now contemplating the best way to evict its unwanted guests. The air inside the bunker felt charged, like the pre-storm tension that makes your hair stand up just before the sky tries to murder you with lightning. Doctor. Jackson Quill stood at the console with the kind of determination usually reserved for people who'd just lost their keys. All right, folks, let's send the planet a message. Maybe a howdy or sorry for digging around in your guts. Wouldn't a fruit basket be easier? Zara grumbled, tightening a stubborn bolt that refused to cooperate, as if it had been taking passive-aggressive classes. Hard to find good pairs on Veridara, Rafe chipped in, arms crossed. He looked as if he was waiting for the planet to just swallow them whole and get it over with. Lyra was deep into her botanical wizardry, translating leaf patterns into a language that only she seemed to understand. If these patterns are a language, we need to respond in the same way. Otherwise, we're just shouting at a wall. A very, very angry wall, Zara muttered, eyeing the console like it might bite her. Jackson nodded, a grim smile tugging at his lips. Well, let's start the conversation before it decides we're not worth talking to and just steps on us. As they worked, the lights flickered again, sporadically enough to be a nuisance, like a fly buzzing around at a picnic you never wanted to attend. Rafe leaned against the wall, watching the screens as Lyra and Jackson input the translated message. The leaves on the table pulsed, a rhythm that hummed through the bunker like a heartbeat. Hey, maybe it's just lonely, Rafe said dryly. A planet-sized introvert with nobody to talk to for eons, Zara snorted. Yes, dear lonely planet, we're here to hold your hand. Now, please don't eat us. Well, it's either reach out or hope it's a fan of interpretive dance after all, Jackson said, hitting the final command on the console. The message was sent like a signal into the void, hoping the void wasn't in a particularly bad mood. For a moment, the bunker was silent, the team holding their collective breath as they waited for a response, or at least the absence of one. The quiet stretched, tension crackling in the air like static. Then the planet replied. The ground beneath them trembled, not the gentle shiver they'd grown accustomed to, but a bone-rattling quake that felt like Veridara was seriously reconsidering its guest list. Dust rained from the ceiling, and Zara let out a string of curses that would have made a sailor blush. That didn't sound like hello, Rafe remarked, gripping the edge of the table for balance. Lyra's eyes were wide, darting between the console and the leaves. I think we might have pissed it off, or confused it, or both. Great, Zara sighed. Just what we need, a planet with anger management issues. The external monitors buzzed with static, the connection to Earth severed like a string cut with a rusty knife. They were officially on their own, the isolation ringing loud and clear as the storm outside grew in intensity, a cosmic tantrum that threatened to tear the bunker apart. Perfect, Jackson said with a grim chuckle. Cut off from command, an angry planet, and a storm that looks like it's auditioning for the apocalypse. At least it can't get worse, Rafe said, instantly regretting the words as the lights dimmed again, sparking back to life with a reluctant hum. Never say that, Zara warned. It's like begging the universe to kick you in the teeth. Jackson squared his shoulders, looking more determined than ever, like a man who'd just realized he'd been playing chess with a checkers set. We keep going. We learn what we can and find a way to make this work. We didn't come all this way to get outsmarted by a rock that's trying to kill us, Lyra reminded him. Yeah, but still just a rock, Jackson replied with a shrug. A very big, very grumpy rock. Lyra returned to her analysis, fingers flying across the keys as she worked to decode the new patterns appearing on the leaves. Zara and Rafe began checking the structural integrity of the bunker, a task that felt as comforting as checking the stitching on a parachute mid-jump. The storm outside was a symphony of chaos, wind howling like a banshee with a vendetta, rain slamming against the bunker in sheets. It was the kind of weather that made you question your life choices, like leaving a perfectly good planet for one that clearly didn't want to make friends. Think of it as an opportunity, Jackson said, as if trying to convince himself more than anyone else. We're learning, evolving. We're pushing the boundaries of what it means to be human. In a tin can, Zara added, tapping a wrench against the wall for emphasis. With a planet that might decide to make us extinct because we're poking it with a stick. Exactly, Jackson replied, a maddening glint in his eye. If we can weaponize human unpredictability, we can handle anything. Even a planet with a bad temper. Rafe watched him, skepticism etched on his face like a permanent fixture. You really think we can control this, that we can talk a planet down from? Whatever this is, Jackson met his gaze, unflinching like a gambler holding a pair of twos and trying to bluff his way through the hand of a lifetime. I think we have to try. Because the alternative is sitting back and waiting for it to make the next move. And what if its next move is squashing us like bugs? Lyra asked, still focused on her work. Then we're gonna need a bigger bug spray, Jackson quipped, turning back to his console. The storm raged on, an uninvited guest that refused to leave, while the team worked tirelessly, desperation and determination in equal measure. They were isolated, alone in a hostile world, but they weren't about to give up without a fight, because that's what humans did best, Jackson thought. They fought, even when the odds were stacked against them, even when the universe seemed to conspire at every turn. They adapted, improvised, survived. Hey, Jackson, Zara called out, a hint of a smile in her voice despite the situation. Next time you pick a planet, can we go somewhere less homicidal? He laughed, a short bark of sound that was more defiance than humor. I'll see what I can do. As they continued their work, the leaves on the table pulsed with a steady rhythm, a reminder that they were not alone, that the planet was listening, waiting for their next move. The air was thick with anticipation, the tension a living thing that pressed against their skin. "We'll figure this out," Jackson said, more to himself than anyone else. "We always do." Outside, the storm howled, a testament to nature's fury and the indomitable spirit of a world that would not be tamed. But inside, in the cramped confines of a bunker that felt more like a lifeboat adrift on an angry sea, the humans fought back with everything they had, and maybe, just maybe, it would be enough. The hours dragged on, each second stretching like a rubber band about to snap. The team worked tirelessly, fueled by the kind of caffeine that could strip paint and pure, unadulterated stubbornness. They analyzed, theorized, and improvised, each new discovery a battle won in a war they didn't fully understand. "Anyone else feel like a lab rat?" Rafe asked, leaning back in his chair, trying to find a position that didn't remind him of his impending back problems. "More like a cockroach," Zara replied, her voice muffled as she worked beneath a console. "Stubborn, hard to kill, and pissing off something way bigger than us." "Charming," Rafe said dryly. "At least we're consistent." Lyra peered at the console, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I think we're getting closer. The patterns are stabilizing, almost like we're making sense," Jackson interrupted, a touch of hope in his voice that he immediately regretted. Hope was dangerous. It made you think you had control when you were really just rolling the dice on a table about to collapse. "Or," Lyra continued, "like the planet's giving us a chance to explain ourselves before it decides to make us a geological footnote." Rafe grunted. "Better than nothing. I'll take a chance over a certainty any day." Jackson nodded, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him like a boulder strapped to his shoulders. "Then let's make it count." "We've come too far to back down now." The team redoubled their efforts, the noise of the storm outside a constant reminder of the stakes. They were on borrowed time in a place that didn't want them, caught in a dance with a partner that was as unpredictable as it was powerful. "Hey, if we get through this," Zara called over. "Drinks are on you, Jackson." He laughed, a genuine sound that felt foreign in the tense atmosphere. "Deal." "I'll even get the good stuff." The planet trembled again, but this time it felt different, less hostile, more curious, as if Veridara was willing to listen, to consider their pleas before making its final judgment. "We've got a chance," Jackson said, feeling a flicker of hope despite himself. "Let's make sure we don't waste it." They worked through the night, a team of misfits and dreamers, fighting against the odds in the face of insurmountable challenges. The storm outside was relentless, but so were they, driven by the belief that they could make a difference, that they could change the outcome with nothing but their wits and sheer determination. Because in the end, that's what it meant to be human. To never give up, even when the universe seemed hell-bent on proving just how small and insignificant they were. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The storm outside showed no sign of abating, each thunderclap a reminder that Veridara was playing by its own rules. Inside the bunker, the team was busy playing a game they didn't fully understand, with stakes higher than a gambler on payday. Lyra was hunched over her console, brow furrowed in concentration. Her fingers danced over the keys, trying to coax some sense out of the stubbornly cryptic leaves. "I think the patterns are evolving," she said, glancing at the others, her voice a mix of excitement and dread. Rafe, ever the pessimist, snorted. "Evolving. Sounds like we're teaching the planet how to play chess when we barely know checkers. More like teaching it to play Russian roulette with a fully loaded gun," Zara added from under the console, her head buried in wires and circuits. She had a knack for finding humor in the bleakest of situations, a skill that came in handy when the universe seemed hell-bent on kicking them in the teeth. Jackson paced the small room like a caged animal, his mind racing with possibilities. "If we don't find a way to communicate, we might as well be signing our own death warrants." "Well, that's optimistic," Rafe said, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed. "And here I thought my job was to lower the morale." "The planet's been adapting," Lyra said, ignoring the sarcasm. "Each time we try something new, Veridara counters it. It's like it's learning." Zara emerged from her console tomb, grease smudging her cheek. "So what do you suggest? We try flattery next. Compliment the planet on its lovely weather." "Maybe," Lyra said, surprising everyone with the seriousness in her voice. "What if we use our unpredictability? We do something so stupid, so illogical that it can't possibly anticipate it." Jackson stopped pacing, turning to face her. "We're scientists, Lyra. We deal in logic and facts." "Yeah, because that's worked out so well for us so far," Rafe chimed in, his voice dry as sandpaper. "He's got a point," Zara said, twirling a wrench thoughtfully. "If there's one thing we're good at, it's being unpredictable. Hell, humans have been doing stupid since the dawn of time." Jackson rubbed his temples, the pressure of leadership pressing down on him like a lead blanket. "So we're going to outdumb a planet. That's our strategy," Lyra shrugged. "Why not? If Veridara's learning, maybe it's time we teach it that humans are masters of chaos." "Chaos is my middle name," Zara said with a smirk. Well, actually, it's Marie, but chaos sounds cooler. Jackson sighed, the weight of desperation heavy in his chest. All right, let's see what we can come up with. But I swear, if we end up all dead, I'm haunting you first, Lyra. Deal, she replied, already turning back to her console. They began brainstorming, each ridiculous idea more outlandish than the last, like a group of mad inventors trying to build a better mousetrap using only duct tape and spite. What if we pretend to leave? Rafe suggested. Pack up and make it seem like we're giving up. Or we could play dead, Zara added. You know, like possums, very dignified. Jackson shook his head, a disbelieving smile tugging at his lips. We're really doing this, aren't we? We're actually considering these plans. Desperate times and all that, Lyra said, her eyes never leaving the screen. As they plotted their unorthodox strategy, the planet continued its assault. The walls of the bunker groaned under the strain, the storm outside a relentless force of nature that promised no mercy. Hey Jackson, Rafe called over, a serious note in his voice cutting through the humor. Whatever happens next, I'm glad it's with you guys. Could have been worse. Could have been on a desk job back on Earth. Yeah, Zara agreed, her voice softer than usual. At least here we get to annoy a planet together. Jackson felt a warmth spread through his chest at their words, a rare moment of camaraderie in the midst of chaos. I wouldn't want to be in this mess with anyone else. They returned to their work with renewed focus, each of them determined to make this crazy plan succeed. It was madness, but it was their madness, and if anyone could pull it off, it was the ragtag team of misfits stuck in a bunker on a planet with a severe attitude problem. All right, Lyra announced, breaking the silence with an air of finality. I've got something. It's stupid, it might get us killed, but it's something. Stupid, you say? Zara grinned. Right up my alley. Lyra handed Jackson a clipboard, the pages filled with calculations and theories that made his head spin. We exaggerate the last signal we sent. Ramp up the unpredictability, make it so erratic that Veridara has no choice but to pay attention. Jackson studied the clipboard as if searching for a hidden answer. So we make noise, lots of it, and hope it doesn't swat us like mosquitoes. Pretty much, Lyra confirmed, but with a mathematical twist. If it's learning, it might try to stabilize us instead, like an immune response. And if it works, Rafe asked, skepticism lacing his voice, then maybe we get a window, a chance to explain ourselves before it decides to finish the job. Jackson nodded slowly. All right, let's do it. Let's use our inherent knack for chaos and throw everything but the kitchen sink at it. Actually, Zara said, tapping her chin thoughtfully, we could include the sink if you think it might help. The team prepared, their movements a frantic dance as they set everything in motion. It felt like the calm before a storm, though given their current stormy situation, that particular metaphor was a little redundant. Ready? Jackson asked, his finger hovering over the console's activation button. Ready as we'll ever be, Zara said, her usual bravado tinged with a trace of nervousness. Let's make some noise, Lyra added, her eyes locked on the console. Jackson pressed the button, and the bunker filled with a cacophony of signals and sounds, a symphony of nonsense designed to confuse and overwhelm, a testament to the human ability to create chaos out of order. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ground shook violently, the bunker groaning as though caught in the throes of an existential crisis. It was as if Veridara itself was considering their offer, a moment of reconsideration, before deciding whether to accept their plea or squash them like errant bugs. Hold on, Jackson shouted over the din, his hands gripping the console as if it were an anchor in a storm-tossed sea. The team clung to whatever they could find, determination etched into their faces as they rode the tremors. It was a gamble, a long shot, but it was all they had, their last-ditch attempt to communicate with a planet that clearly had no use for them. Then, as suddenly as it began, the shaking stopped. The storm outside abated, the howling winds dying down to a whisper, leaving the bunker in an eerie silence. Did it work? Zara asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and hope. Rafe peered out the small, reinforced window, his brow furrowed. Well, we're not dead yet, so that's a start. Lyra hurried back to her console, her fingers flying over the keys as she checked the data. The patterns, they're changing, the erratic signals. It's trying to stabilize them. Jackson let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. So we confused it into listening. Looks like it, Lyra confirmed, a look of triumph on her face. We bought ourselves a moment, a chance to explain. We did it, Zara said, a grin spreading across her face. We outstupided a planet. Jackson laughed, a sound filled with relief and disbelief. I can't believe that worked. But it did, Rafe said, a rare smile touching his lips. Now let's hope it's enough to get the planet to give us more than just a ceasefire. The team continued to work, trying to piece together a coherent explanation that Veridara might understand. It was a daunting task, like trying to reason with a toddler having a tantrum, but they were determined to make it work. Hey, Jackson, Zara called over as she tinkered with the communication arrays. If this works and we get out of here alive, you still owe us those drinks. You can have the whole damn bar, Jackson replied, the weight of hope settling in his chest once more. Just as long as we survive this. The storm of emotions in the bunker was intense, a mix of hope, fear, and determination swirling around them like the remnants of the storm outside. They were closer than they'd ever been, and though the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty, they knew one thing for sure: they'd come too far to back down now. All right, Jackson said, his voice steady as he turned to face the team. Let's convince a planet not to kill us. With renewed determination, they set to work, a group of humans fighting against the odds with nothing but their wits, their courage, and the stubborn refusal to give up. It wasn't much, but maybe, just maybe, it would be enough to turn the tide. Because if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was doing the impossible, especially when the universe told them they couldn't. And as they worked, the leaves on the table pulsed gently, a reminder that the planet was still listening, ready to judge their next move. It was time to make their case. The bunker decided to take a page from Veridara's book and throw a tantrum of its own. It started with a flicker, a stutter of the lights, then the delightful scent of burning circuits, a surefire way to ruin anyone's day. "Ah, there it is," Rafe drawled, his expression as upbeat as a funeral, the sweet smell of impending doom. Jackson swore under his breath, fiddling with the console like a cat with a particularly stubborn mouse. "Can't anything just work for once? Not since the day we stepped foot on this god-forsaken rock," Zara replied, tugging at the collar of her jumpsuit like it was trying to strangle her. Lyra's fingers danced over her keyboard, her face a mix of determination and dread. She didn't even look up as sparks flew from a nearby terminal. "I hate to interrupt our regularly scheduled programming of sarcasm and despair, but we've got bigger issues. You're full of good news today, Lyra," Jackson muttered, trying to ignore the ominous beeping that probably meant something expensive was about to explode. "Well, the planet's still trying to chat," Lyra said, her voice the only spot of calm in the mechanical chaos. "I think I've figured out why. Enlighten us, O Oracle of the Leaf," Zara quipped, her tone biting through the tension like a laser scalpel. Lyra spared her a glance, half a smile curling her lips. "It's the signal. We misunderstood it from the start. It's not an attack, it's confused." Like a dog barking at its own reflection, Rafe snorted, leaning back in his chair as though this revelation was just another Tuesday. "So we've been picking a fight with a planet that's basically yelling who's a good boy at itself, more or less," Lyra shrugged, eyes flickering back to the screen. "I think it didn't understand our presence any more than we understood it. We're the surprise guests at its housewarming party, and it's thrashing around trying to figure out who invited us." Jackson rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar sensation of a headache that was quickly becoming a roommate. "And in the meantime, the house is crumbling." "Well, we did turn the volume up to 11, Zara pointed out, not unkindly. "Maybe it's just having a little planetary meltdown." "Great," Jackson muttered. "We've pissed off a planet and our shelter's throwing a hissy fit." "Wonderful." Lyra's fingers hesitated, then paused, a new light in her eyes. "Wait, if it's confused, maybe it's because we're too unpredictable. What if we can use that?" Jackson's hope meter, currently operating at basement levels, ticked up a notch. "What's the play? We send a consistent signal," Lyra explained, a mad glint in her eye that suggested either brilliance or insanity, often indistinguishable in their line of work. "Something that tells it we're here to help. We stop screaming and start whispering." "Whisper, yell, deliver a singing telegram," Rafe shrugged. "Long as it doesn't eat us. Guess it's time to see if we can calm down our confused rock," Zara said, cracking her knuckles. As if on cue, the lights flickered again, and the console sparked with a malevolence that suggested it, too, was tired of their nonsense. "Gonna be a lot harder to whisper sweet nothings if the system fries," Jackson commented, giving the console a look that promised violence if it didn't behave. "Then we'd better fix it," Zara said, rolling up her sleeves with the determination of someone preparing to wrestle a crocodile. "Or die trying." "Great pep talk, really motivational," Rafe deadpanned, but he moved to help because what else was he going to do? Watch the world end while eating popcorn. The team scrambled, each person a cog in the desperate, clanking machine of their survival. There was no room for mistakes, but plenty for dark humor and cynical asides, because gallows humor was their bread and butter now. "You know," Jackson said as he worked, "when I pictured us working together, I didn't think it would involve dodging electrocution." "Life's full of surprises," Zara replied, keeping one eye on the sparking wires. "Like finding out your roommate is a murderous planet, or that you're roommates with a pack of lunatics," Rafe added, mostly to himself. As they toiled, the ground shivered beneath them, a gentle reminder from Veridara that it hadn't forgotten their little spat. Each tremor felt like the planet clearing its throat, a cosmic warning that their time was running out. Despite everything, there was a certain camaraderie in the chaos. A shared insanity born from fighting against a world that seemed determined to squish them like bugs. It was almost comforting in a fatalistic sort of way. We're good, Zara announced, a little too cheerfully for someone who'd just dodged electrocution. The console's stable. For now. Stable's a relative term, Rafe commented, eyeing the console like it might bite. Let's just hope it holds together long enough for us to send our sorry we crashed your party message, Jackson said, punching in a sequence with fingers that had started to shake. Outside, the storm had reduced to a grumble, the winds a whisper in comparison to their previous roar. It was as if Veradara was listening, its curiosity piqued by the prospect of understanding these unpredictable creatures in its midst. All right, Lyra said, finality in her tone, sending our apology note now. Fingers crossed it has a sense of humor. Jackson hit the button, sending their carefully crafted frequency into the ether. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble. But then that was their specialty, wasn't it? For a few eternal minutes there was nothing but silence, the kind that weighed heavy like a judge's gavel. They waited, breath held, as if daring the universe to make its next move. Then a tremor rolled through the bunker, a gentle sway more akin to a nod than a threat. The leaves on the table pulsed in tandem, a symphony of light and sound that seemed to echo their signal back at them. I think it's working, Lyra breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. Zara's grin was almost feral in its triumph. Who knew? Apologies, the universal language. Let's hope it translates to please don't eat us, Rafe said, though his tone held more warmth than his words. Jackson let out a breath, feeling the tight coil of fear in his chest slowly unwind. They weren't out of the woods yet, but for the first time, it felt like they might just find their way through. Well, he said, a genuine smile tugging at his lips. Looks like we might live to see another day. Don't jinx it, Zara warned, but her eyes sparkled with the same hope. With the immediate crisis averted, the team slumped into a weary but relieved silence. They were still alive, still fighting, and maybe, just maybe, they'd found a way to coexist with the planet that had been trying to kill them. Think we'll get a chance to explain ourselves to HQ? Rafe asked, ever the pessimist. Let's worry about that after we confirm the planet isn't going to squash us flat first, Jackson replied, his chuckle a low rumble in his throat. There was still much to do, too many questions unanswered, but they'd earned a breather. A moment to savor the fact they'd managed to outsmart a planet, if only for a little while. Hey, Zara said, her voice cutting through the quiet. Anyone else feel like celebrating with some? She paused, frowning. Well, all we've got are ration bars, but hey, it's the thought that counts. Celebrating with cardboard, Rafe muttered, though he accepted the bar she tossed his way. Lyra leaned back in her chair, exhaustion pulling at her limbs but a satisfied smile on her face. You know, I've had worse parties. Really? Jackson asked, raising an eyebrow. No, she admitted, not really. They laughed, the sound a little hysterical but entirely genuine. Against all odds, their ragtag team of misfits had survived another day. And if they were lucky, they'd find a way to make peace with the planet that had, reluctantly, decided not to kill them just yet. Still, Jackson mused as he took a bite of his ration bar. Who'd have thought we'd end up here, apologizing to a planet? Just another day at the office, Zara said, raising her bar in a mock toast. To surviving stupidly, Lyra added, clinking her bar against the others. And with that, they settled into a silence that was far more comfortable than it had any right to be. A silence filled with the knowledge that, for better or worse, they were in this together. A bunch of humans clinging to life on a planet that had, against its better judgment, decided to tolerate them a bit longer. In the end, maybe that's all anyone could hope for. A little more time, a little more understanding, and maybe, just maybe, the chance to do something truly unpredictable. Doctor. Jackson Quill stood at the console, which was currently behaving like the world's crankiest toaster, eyeing the contraption with a mixture of dread and resignation. The rest of the team hovered nearby, their expressions a cocktail of fatigue and anticipation. The bunker, their beloved tin can, continued to groan under the weight of its own inadequacies, casting flickers of light like it was trying to host a disco for suicidal moths. So, Zara drawled, lounging against a wall with the grace of an overcaffeinated cat, we've apologized to a planet. What's next? Sending it flowers and hoping for a second date. I'd rather just survive the first one, Rafe chimed in, fiddling with a wire that seemed to have ambitions of strangling him, preferably without getting ghosted by a cosmic rock. Lyra, the botanist with a penchant for the weird, tapped away at the keyboard, her focus as sharp as a surgeon's. Hey, speaking of flowers, these leaves are still reacting to our signals. It's like they're listening. Listening leaves, Jackson snorted. What's next? Singing rocks? I dunno, Zara said. Singing rocks might be a step up from screaming consoles. Jackson rubbed his eyes with the heels of his palms, the weight of their absurd situation pressing down like a lead blanket. All right, let's get back on track. We can't just wait around. We need to figure out how to communicate with Veradara. Something beyond sorry for crashing your party, and hope it doesn't RSVP with a meteor shower, Rafe added dryly. A soft chuckle rippled through the team, their gallows humor a buoy keeping them afloat in a sea of potential doom. It was a miracle they were still functioning, let alone devising a plan to cozy up to an entire planet. Lyra leaned back in her chair, a thoughtful expression tugging at the corners of her mouth. Maybe our unpredictability is the key. We've been all over the place, and it's reacting to that. Right, Zara said, tapping her chin. So what, we just act like a bunch of lunatics and hope it appreciates our creative madness? Exactly, Jackson said, surprising himself with the enthusiasm in his voice. We do what no machine or hyperlogical alien would expect. We be human, Rafe snorted, shaking his head. I didn't know being an erratic mess was a superpower. Well, Jackson replied, we've got one thing going for us. We're very good at being unpredictable. It's literally in our DNA, and in our job description, Zara added, her grin more than a little wicked. They set to work, each person playing their part in this bizarre theater of survival. Lyra continued to monitor the leaves, her fingers a blur on the keyboard as she tweaked their signals. Zara and Rafe scavenged parts from the seemingly endless pile of broken tech, jury-rigging contraptions that looked like they'd either save them or blow them up. Jackson was in his element, the console his reluctant dance partner in this jittery waltz of man versus machine. He'd always been good under pressure, but this was a whole new level of insanity. It felt like defusing a bomb with a rubber chicken and a prayer. Okay, Lyra said, her voice cutting through the clatter and hum of the bunker. I think I've got something. A signal pattern that's, well, it's weird, but it might just work. Weird is our specialty, Zara remarked, tightening a bolt with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for murdering cockroaches. How do we know this won't just make it angrier? Rafe asked, ever the optimist. We don't, Jackson admitted, but we're running out of options. And I'd rather try something than sit here waiting for the ceiling to cave in. Fair point, Rafe conceded, giving a nod that was more resigned than confident. With a collective breath, they prepared to send the signal, fingers hovering over terminals as if they were about to launch a rocket, rather than beg a planet not to squish them. There was something ridiculous about the whole scenario, but also a certain beauty. A testament to human stubbornness, or maybe just their penchant for doing stupid things with gusto. All right, folks, Jackson said, his voice taking on the gravitas of someone about to lead an army into battle. Let's show Veridara what a real human greeting looks like, complete with jazz hands, Zara muttered, earning a snort of laughter from Rafe. Lyra initiated the signal, and the console lit up like a Christmas tree on a sugar high. They watched as the leaves responded, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed almost curious. It was like watching a cat eye a laser pointer, unsure if it was friend or foe. Is it working? Rafe asked, not daring to blink. Seems like it, Lyra replied, a note of awe in her voice. It's responding. I don't know how to describe it, but it feels like it's listening. Listening or plotting our demise, Zara quipped, though even her cynicism was laced with hope. Jackson felt his heart skip a beat, his mind racing with possibilities. They might actually have a shot at this, at making contact in a way that wasn't just man versus nature, but something more cooperative. Keep it steady, he said, his fingers dancing across the console. Let's not scare it off now. Like a wild animal, Rafe muttered, watching the readings like they might suddenly sprout teeth and bite him. They maintained the signal, their unpredictable dance of frequencies a testament to human ingenuity. It was a gamble, a desperate act of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds, but it was working. The planet seemed to be calming, its previous hostility replaced with something that felt almost like curiosity. Okay, Lyra said, her voice barely containing her excitement. We're getting feedback, it's trying to communicate. Is this the part where we find out it's actually a giant alien intelligence and not just rocks and leaves? Zara asked, her tone half joking, half serious. Who knows, Jackson replied, his grin widening. But if we can communicate even a little, maybe we can find a way to coexist. Or at least not blow each other up, Rafe said, crossing his fingers like he was warding off a bad omen. The console beeped, the sound somehow less ominous, more like a polite cough rather than a death knell. They'd done it. They'd reached Veridara, and the planet was responding. It was a start, a small victory in a war they hadn't even known they were fighting. Okay, Jackson said, leaning back with a sigh of relief. We've got a conversation going. Let's see if we can keep it up. The team settled into a rhythm, their initial panic subsiding as they continued to work. It was still tense, every flicker of the lights a reminder that their situation was precarious, but at least they had a plan. At least they were doing something. So, Zara said after a while, her voice breaking the silence with a casual drawl, are we the first humans to accidentally start a conversation with a planet? Probably, Lyra replied, her eyes never leaving the screen. Doesn't seem like the kind of thing they cover in the manual. Manuals are for losers, Rafe said, a hint of mischief in his voice. Real pioneers wing it and hope for the best, Jackson agreed, his expression one of determined optimism. That's the human way. They continued their work, the ires blending together in a blur of data and signals. It was exhausting, frustrating, but also thrilling. They were breaking new ground, exploring not just a new world, but the very limits of what it meant to be human. "All right," Lyra said finally, looking up with a tired but satisfied smile. "I think we've done it." Veridara's responding positively. "It's not trying to kill us anymore. Score 1 for the unpredictable humans," Zara said, her grin wide and genuine. "And 0 for the planet with anger management issues," Rafe added, his tone light with relief. Jackson allowed himself a moment to bask in their success, the weight of their achievement settling over him like a well-worn cloak. They'd done it. They'd reached out to a planet and it had reached back. It was a small step, but one that felt monumental. "So," Zara said, stretching her arms over her head, "what's the next step? Do we send it a fruit basket?" "Maybe," Jackson replied with a chuckle. "But first, let's make sure it doesn't change its mind and decide we're better off as fertilizer." "Always the optimist," Rafe said, his voice warm with camaraderie. They laughed, the sound echoing through the bunker like a balm to their frayed nerves. It was a rare moment of peace in their chaotic existence, a reminder that no matter how dire things got, they still hit each other. They were a team, a ragtag group of survivors who'd faced down the unknown and come out the other side. "To surviving the impossible," Jackson said, raising an imaginary glass. The others joined in, their voices blending together in a toast to their own resilience. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to keep them going, to keep them fighting, to keep them human. As they settled back into their work, the bunker seemed to sigh in relief, its walls no longer groaning with the threat of imminent collapse. They'd managed to stave off disaster for another day, to outwit a planet that had nearly been their undoing. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but it was a start. A chance to prove that even in the darkest of times, humanity could rise to the occasion. And maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way to truly communicate with Veridara, to forge a new path in this strange, unpredictable world they'd found themselves in. It was a daunting task, but one they were uniquely suited for. After all, unpredictability was their specialty. The bunker was a cacophony of whirs, clicks, and occasional sparks, resembling a symphony conducted by someone who really hated music. The storm above ground was relentless, a constant reminder that they'd digested all the calm they were ever going to get. Veridara wasn't much for peace and quiet, but neither were its human occupants. Jackson Quill squinted at the console like it had just insulted his mother. "Okay, team, time for plan. Whatever number we're on now." Operation confused the crap out of Veridara. Zara, leaning against the wall with her usual air of devil-may-care, cracked a smile. "So we're just gonna keep doing what we're best at, acting like idiots. Idiots with style," Jackson corrected, eyes gleaming with the kind of mischief that usually got people into trouble. "Remember unpredictability, our secret weapon." Rafe, the group's self-appointed cynic, snorted as he fiddled with a jury-rigged device that looked like a blender with a vendetta. "Great, so our entire survival strategy is based on being completely and utterly incompetent. I feel better already." "Exactly," Jackson said, dead serious. "We've got to keep Veridara guessing." Lyra, her fingers a-flurry on the keyboard, looked up with the bemusement of someone who still couldn't quite believe this was happening. "You guys do realize we're about to have a conversation with leaves, right? Leaves, and they're not even the fun kind you can smoke." Jackson clapped his hands together, the sound echoing through the room like a gunshot. "All right, let's make some noise. Lyra, crank up those signals. Zara, you and Rafe get those contraptions humming. Time to give Veridara the full human experience. Chaos, noise, and a complete lack of logical reasoning. Sounds like my last date," Zara muttered, wrenching a bolt into place with a grunt. Rafe chuckled, shaking his head as he connected another wire. "And just like your last date, let's hope it doesn't end with us running for our lives." The team set to work, their actions a chaotic dance of human ingenuity or desperation, depending on how you looked at it. The console beeped erratically, as if protesting the abuse it was enduring. Jackson's fingers flew over the keys, trying to keep up with the madness they were creating. The leaves outside flickered in response, their patterns shifting like a kaleidoscope on acid. "What do you think it's thinking?" Lyra asked, half to herself, half to the room. "If it's anything like us, probably wondering where it put its keys," Zara said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Rafe tossed a piece of broken tech over his shoulder, not bothering to see where it landed. "Or it's contemplating the meaning of life and deciding we're the punchline." "Let's hope it has a sense of humor," Jackson replied, his eyes glued to the screen. "Otherwise, we're screwed." The bunker shuddered, the lights flickering in time with the storm's distant roars. It was like being inside a shaken snow globe, except the snow was a mix of anxiety and potentially lethal signals. Lyra suddenly slammed her hands on the keyboard, a grin breaking across her face. "Got it, it's responding. I think it's curious." "Great," Zara said dryly. "We've got a planet that's curious, just what we needed. Next thing you know, it'll be asking for our star signs." "Hey, it could be worse," Rafe chimed in. "It might not even have internet here." Jackson shot them a look that was both exasperated and amused. Focus, people. We're in the middle of a conversation with a planet. Let's not screw it up by being too us. The console's display shifted, the signal patterns changing. It almost felt like they were in sync, humans and planet, a reluctant duet between nature and technology. The leaves outside rustled, their movement oddly harmonious with the signals Lyra was sending. Okay, Lyra said, her excitement barely contained. It's listening, we're actually talking to it. Is it asking us to leave? Zara asked. Cause I wouldn't blame it. Jackson shook his head, a mix of disbelief and pride on his face. No, it seems to want to know more, like it's intrigued by our insanity. Join the club, Rafe muttered, his eyes fixed on the readings. We're the most interesting show on Veradara right now. Jackson leaned back, the weight of the console's heat seeping into his bones. All right, let's keep this going. Lyra, keep the signals varied. Zara, Rafe, be ready to improvise. If Veradara wants a show, we're the stars of this freak circus. And so they continued, the ires blurring together in a cocktail of electronics, tension, and the odd burst of laughter that was more defiant than joyful. It was a bizarre, frantic dance, but it was working. Veradara was no longer the hostile entity it had seemed. Instead, it felt more like an aloof neighbor, curious and cautious. Think it'll invite us over for tea? Zara asked, her grin a bit manic. Only if it spikes it with cyanide, Rafe replied, but there was a warmth to his voice that hadn't been there before. Lyra leaned back, stretching her arms as if she'd been wrestling with the keyboard itself. I've got good news and bad news. Always start with the bad, Jackson said, his tone resigned. The bad news is this might be the high point of our careers, she said, her eyes twinkling with mischief. And the good? Zara asked, leaning forward with interest. The good news is, we might not die today. Well, that's a relief, Rafe said, sarcasm lacing his words like a fine wine. The console pulsed gently, the kind of sound that was almost a purr rather than the usual mechanical screech. They had done it. They'd managed to commune with Veradara, to find a tiny thread of understanding in a situation that had seemed more likely to end in disaster. All right, let's not get cocky, Jackson said, though his voice was lighter than it had been in days. We've opened a dialogue. Now we just have to make sure we don't say anything stupid. Too late for that, Zara laughed, crossing her arms with satisfaction. The bunker, for all its quirks and groans, felt a little more like home. They'd faced down the unknown and made it blink, if only for a moment. It was a triumph, small and shaky, but real. As the storm rumbled on, the team settled into a steady rhythm, their earlier panic replaced with determination. They had a long way to go, but they'd found a way forward. A way to coexist with Veradara, even if it meant embracing the unpredictable nature that made them human. So, Jackson said, grinning like a madman, what's next on the agenda? Considering we've just made peace with a planet, Rafe said thoughtfully, I vote for a nap. Lyra chuckled, nodding in agreement. Never thought I'd say it, but I miss boredom. Don't worry, Zara added, her voice teasing. We'll find plenty more ways to nearly die. Jackson shook his head, a smile tugging at his lips. Yes, but at least we'll do it together. The team laughed, their voices mingling with the hum of the bunker. They were battered, bruised, and more than a little insane, but they were alive, and for now, that was enough. It was more than they dared hope for when this mad adventure began. To the unpredictable, Jackson declared, raising an imaginary glass once more. The others joined in, a toast to their own brand of lunacy, to the strange beauty of surviving against the odds. They'd stared into the abyss and flipped at the bird, and somehow that had made all the difference. As they sat there, the bunker a safe haven in a hostile world, they knew they'd face more challenges. More storms, more chaos, more insanity. But they'd face it the way they always did, with snark, sarcasm, and an unshakable belief in their own unpredictability. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The bunker was still its usual symphony of chaos, but now it was a chaos with purpose. And that's saying something when your purpose is to confuse a planet. Jackson Quill sat back, propping his feet up on the console, the picture of a man who had just convinced the universe, or at least a part of it, that he was worth not killing. Well, team, he said, we didn't die. High five for mediocrity. Zara gave him a lazy salute from her spot against the wall, her devil-may-care grin firmly in place. Mediocrity suits us. It's like that comfy pair of socks with just the right amount of holes. Yeah, Rafe piped in, stifling a yawn. And just like those socks, we probably smell a bit funky after all this. Speak for yourselves, Lyra said, her fingers still dancing over the keyboard like a caffeinated spider. I've got eucalyptus-scented deodorant. Keeps me fresh even when I'm conversing with foliage. Right, Jackson replied, rolling his eyes. Because that's what we've been missing in this scientific breakthrough, botanical freshness. Outside, the storm continued its relentless rage against everything above ground. Inside, though, the bunker felt different. Not peaceful, exactly. That would be asking too much, but different. The kind of different that comes when you've made a truce with your own insanity. With a sigh, Jackson turned his attention back to the console. So, document this, Lyra. We need to make sure our accidental diplomacy doesn't go to waste. Future generations might want to learn how not to accidentally insult a planet. Lyra nodded, her eyes flicking to the screen where lines of code and data danced like drunken dancers at a wedding. And here I thought I'd spend my life talking to plants that just sat there. These leaves are a whole new level of weird. Zara leaned over her shoulder, her eyes narrowing at the screen. What's it saying now? Dear humans, thank you for the chaos. Your stupidity is refreshing in a cosmos full of order. Close, Lyra laughed. It's more like, dear humans, your chaos is fascinating. Please continue your existence. We need the entertainment. Rafe scoffed, jabbing a finger at a button on his jury-rigged device. Great were the monkeys in the zoo, and Veridara's got front-row tickets. At least they're not throwing peanuts at us, Zara pointed out, her devil-may-care grin returning. Jackson scratched his chin, staring thoughtfully at the console. Look, we've done something amazing here. We've proved that unpredictability can be an asset, maybe even a weapon, and all it took was making complete fools of ourselves, Rafe said. I feel a Nobel Prize coming. Yeah, right after they rename it the Nobel Prize for Advanced Buffoonery, Zara shot back. Lyra's fingers paused over the keyboard. It's more than that. We've built a bridge between logic and chaos. Veridara is understanding us now. It's not just curious, it's learning. Jackson nodded slowly. That's the key, isn't it? If we can teach Veridara to appreciate the beauty in disorder, maybe it'll stop trying to wipe us out. And maybe they'll start an interplanetary jazz band while they are at it, Rafe added dryly. The console beeped again, the signals shifting like a digital heartbeat. Lyra's eyes lit up. It's sending something new, feels like. Gratitude, gratitude, Zara echoed, incredulous. A planet that's thankful. Is this a first? Probably the first time a celestial body thanked its would-be invaders for their blunders, Rafe said, shaking his head in disbelief. Hey, I'll take a compliment where I can get it, Jackson replied, folding his arms behind his head with a smirk. Even if it's from a rock, the team fell into a reflective silence, the kind that happens when you've stared death or interplanetary miscommunication in the face and somehow walked away with your limbs and sanity mostly intact. So what's next? Rafe asked. Do we just pack up and leave, or do we stick around to see what kind of sitcom we can turn this into? Jackson leaned forward, his eyes glimmering with the kind of mischief that had gotten them into this mess to begin with. I think we stick around, see what else we can learn. Maybe Veridara's got a few more secrets up its sleeves. Assuming it has sleeves, Zara quipped. Lyra tapped a few keys, saving the latest round of data into their logs. At the very least, this will make for one hell of a report. How to win friends and influence planets. Step 1, Rafe said, holding up a finger. Be completely unpredictable. Step 2, apologize profusely when things go wrong. Zara laughed, shaking her head. And step 3, make sure your team is full of idiots who are too stubborn to quit. Cheers to that, Jackson said, nodding appreciatively. And to making the improbable possible, one chaotic step at a time. The storm continued to rage outside, a relentless force that seemed almost trivial now. Inside, the team felt an odd sense of camaraderie born from shared madness. They turned their unpredictability into an asset, found a way to coexist with a sentient planet, and maybe, just maybe, changed the rules of engagement on Veridara. To the future, Lyra said, raising an imaginary glass. Let it be just as unpredictable as the present. More so, Zara added. Keeps things interesting. The others joined in, their laughter echoing through the bunker, a sound of defiance in the face of the universe's endless absurdity. They'd found a way to adapt, to survive, and even thrive in a place that had seemed determined to chew them up and spit them out. We've made history, Jackson said, his voice filled with a rare sincerity. Or at least a very bizarre footnote. Either way, it's something, Rafe replied, and that's better than nothing. So long as we live to tell the tale, Lyra added, her fingers still flying over the keyboard as she documented their adventure for posterity. The console beeped again, a soft, almost friendly sound. Like Veridara was listening, maybe even approving. It seemed the planet had a thing for chaos after all. Think it'll throw us a party next? Zara asked. Jackson grinned. Only if we promise to bring the entertainment. Their work was far from over, but for the first time in a long while it didn't feel like a burden. They'd established a dialogue, a connection, with a world that seemed entirely alien, and perhaps in the process they'd discovered something about themselves too. That unpredictability, far from being a flaw, was their greatest strength. So, Rafe said, breaking the silence with a wry smile, who's up for another round of what could possibly go wrong? Count me in, Zara replied, her grin wide and mischievous. The others echoed the sentiment, their spirits buoyed by the knowledge that they'd face the unknown and come out the other side with their heads held high, albeit with a few more bruises and a wealth of stories to tell. To Veridara, Jackson said, raising his imaginary glass once more, and to making the impossible possible. To chaos, Lyra added, her eyes bright with the promise of new adventures. And to us, Rafe concluded, nodding firmly, because if we can survive this, we can survive anything. The team toasted to their own brand of madness, their laughter mingling with the hum of the bunker, a testament to their resilience and their refusal to back down in the face of adversity. They'd found a way to coexist with Veradara, and in doing so, they discovered a part of themselves they hadn't known existed. As they settled back into their makeshift roles, ready to face whatever came next, the storm outside raged on, a familiar, almost comforting presence. But inside, the atmosphere was one of quiet triumph. They'd carved out a place for themselves on a world that had seemed determined to erase them, and for once the odds were in their favor. So, Lyra said, her voice filled with a mix of exhaustion and excitement. What's next on our agenda? Save the universe, Zara suggested. Maybe start with saving ourselves first, Rafe said, chuckling. Jackson just smiled, a hint of mischief in his eyes. Whatever it is, we'll tackle it like we always do, with style, grace, and a little bit of chaos. And with that, they returned to their stations, ready to face whatever the universe decided to throw at them next. Because if there was one thing they knew for certain, it was that they could handle anything life on Veradara, or anywhere else, chose to dish out. They were, after all, the champions of unpredictability.